Hello and welcome to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm your moderator, Saigon Steve. On this recorded podcast, we'll talk with service alumni who were stationed at Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam and talk with them about their experiences. Today's podcast is pre-recorded, but you're invited to participate on future podcasts by emailing your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. So let's get started with today's Phuket guest. Okay, our guest right now is Alan Sugarman, former alumni from Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam. Hello, Alan.
How you doing?
So, Alan, where are you located now?
I live in Poway, California, which is just a little north of San Diego.
I see. Tell me about when you joined the United States Air Force. How long ago was that?
1966, January 13th, 1966.
You were just a youngster then, as we all were.
19, yeah.
So then you joined the Air Force, and of course you went to Lackland Air Force Base in San Antonio, Texas, right?
Went there for about a month, and then went to Keesler Air Force Base in Biloxi, Mississippi, finished basic training there. You know, back then when we were, a lot of us were going through basic, they did a lot of second phase at other bases. So that happened to me. And then I went through about 8 months of tech school.
I want to hear about your tech school. Where did you go to tech school?
It was there in Keesler,
in
Mississippi. And I was airborne communication. And so, you know, learned basic electronics, then what we called sets, which was your specialty. And something interesting about it, for me, it was about 8 or 9 months, if I remember correctly. AFSC was 30 when I graduated. What's interesting is, you know, we went to school for 6 hours a day, 6 days a week, if memory serves. I added all that up a few years ago. And it comes out to about the same number of hours that you would have to study for, that you have to go to college for at a junior college to gain an associate's degree. And for my case, it was in electronics. So it's interesting that the education I got in the Air Force was equivalent to an associate's degree. And actually, when I got out, I worked in electronics, and I got paid as an associate engineer. So no regrets. Best things that ever happened to me.
On the side, I have a buddy of mine who was regular Air Force for 4 years. And when he signed up, they said, what would you like to do? And he said, I want to do electronics. They never put him anywhere near electronics. So he ended up doing all the other things in the Air Force, but not electronics. So you actually fulfilled what he wanted to do.
When I joined, and I guess they honored this all the time, they did with me, you knew you would be going into a certain general area when you joined. And that for me, the general area was electronics. You didn't know if it was going to be radar, computers, you know, whatever. But you knew it was going to be electronics. And so, really good deal.
So tell me, Alan, what was it like when you got the orders to go to Vietnam? Did you know where in Vietnam you were going to be going?
Yes, I did know. I was a little disappointed. I knew I'd be going. We all knew we were in training to go to Vietnam. You know, we spent about anywhere from 6 to 12 months in tech school, depending on what your AFSC was, what your job was. And then for most of us, we went to another base after our training. So after Keesler, I went to Luke Air Force Base in Phoenix. And that's where you got your real hands-on. That's where you went out and worked on the airplanes and worked in the shop. So you went back and forth between flight line and the shop. So you got that, as I said, that's where you got your real experience, your hands-on experience working with the equipment. And that's we all knew we were going to Vietnam, so there were no surprises. But a lot of the people that I knew and worked with went to a base called Tui Wa, and so I was hoping to go to Tui Wa with my friends, but went to Phuket. But you know, when you're in those situations, you make friends real quick. So probably a week after I got to Phuket, I had 20 best new friends.
Well, you probably know that Phuket was known as Base X. They really didn't tell you that there was a base called Phuket, so you really didn't know until you were getting close to get on the aircraft to go that that's where you were going.
Yeah. I knew I had to go back to Lackland for some intermediate training. I kind of cross-trained into crypto repair because our radios had crypto equipment. And kind of through the pipeline, you knew where that equipment was, which bases it was on. So you got an inkling of where you were going because of the equipment they were training you for. And ironically, when I got to Phuket, I never saw that equipment.
So when you came to Phuket, did you land at Phuket or did you land at another base first and then come to Phuket?
No, I landed at Cam Bay, as I think most of us Air Force guys flew over in commercial airlines. I don't remember which airline I flew in over there, but got to Cam Bay, and you know, it's a big base and you don't know what to do. So they did have some instruction. This was early November of 1967. I believe I got there on the 5th of November. And you just basically hopped a flight, you know, to where you were going. So I found a C-130 that was going from Cam to Phuket, and that's how I got there. And then I did the opposite when I left. I took a C-130 back from Phuket to Cam and out of Cam.
Well, I was one of the ones that we left from Charleston, South Carolina, and we flew to, and this was on a one C-141. So we went from Charleston, South Carolina to Anchorage, Alaska, to Yokohama, Japan, and then we flew right into Phuket, right to the flight line. So I asked people, I know what my reaction was when they opened up the door on the C-141 and about 180 degrees started coming through into the aircraft, and I looked outside and I said, "This is where I'm going to die." I really thought that. Yeah. So what was your reaction when you got off the plane?
You know, I don't remember anything at all about that, but something I do remember very, very vividly was as the airline that I was on was, you know, banking and turning to come into Cam Bay, because as I said, that's where I came from. I don't remember where I left from in the U.S., but anyway, as we were banking and I could see Vietnam for the first time, you know, from maybe we were 1,500 feet or 1,000 feet off the deck. I looked down and, you know, all you see is jungle, really. And I remember thinking to myself, so this is where it's all about. You know, I had been hearing about it for 3 or 4 years. As I said, this was 1960, late 67. So, you know, Vietnam had been kind of in the forefront for, you know, a few years now. So that was my reaction. I looked down and it was like, it didn't seem real. It was like this beautiful jungle, you know, that I'd love to go visit under other circumstances. And it was kind of surreal that there was a war going on down there. And this is what I've been hearing about for the last, you know, 3, 4, 5 years.
So then I guess you reported to your first sergeant when you got off the plane, right?
No, they had they knew there were a few of us coming, and so there was somebody there from the squadron that took us over to transient barracks, which we only stayed in like one night, and then somebody came and got us. There were 4 or 5 of us that were going to the same squadron, and I don't know if it was the same for you, but the barracks I was in there were two buildings, and each building held, I think, there was an upstairs and a downstairs, and it was all from our squadron. So they took us from the transient barracks to our squadron. We got settled in a room, and I say a room, they were open bay barracks that the guys had divided off themselves. They put up walls themselves. I don't know what it was like. What kind of accommodations did you have?
Well, our barracks, they also were 2 floors, and they were separated like cubicles. And what separated one from the other was your wooden locker, and of course your bunk, your double bunk. And so you had just enough room for the bunk and your closet, wooden closet, and you had a little table. And you needed 2 things to survive there. First of all, you needed a fan that oscillated back and forth. Yeah. And you needed a refrigerator. Those were the 2 necessities, right? When you were there.
Yep. Yeah. And so ours were basically the same. And, but somehow the guys before I got there got a hold, probably through some GI deal. The way we used to work deals, got a hold of lumber and put up walls between the cubicles. So they were private rooms. It was a bit rickety because, most of the guys weren't, you couldn't get exactly the material you wanted. And the walls were all, it was plywood walls that they had gotten these gasoline blowtorches and kind of scorched the walls a little bit, just a little, so they turn kind of brown.
To give you ambiance, right?
Yeah, you got to have the ambiance. But you're right, the refrigerators, and as people came and went, they bought into the refrigerator. The original people bought it. When I got to my room, there were 2 other guys, so we were in a 3-man room, and there was a refrigerator and a fan there. And, I had to kick in whatever it was, $20 or something. And then when I left, I got my $20 back from the guy who moved in. So
people who are listening to this podcast now who were stationed in Phuket, just to give them an idea where your barracks was located, mine was basically directly across from the chapel. Where was yours in relation to the chapel?
Not too far from the chapel. It really wasn't. It was probably the equivalent of a couple of city blocks. So yeah, not too far from the chapel.
So getting back to your AFSC, you would work on equipment in maintenance to keep things running. Is that basically what it was, rather than operating it?
Well, yeah, we were primarily maintenance, and since I worked. We had in Vietnam at Phuket at the time, we worked 12-hour shifts, and my shift was 6 p.m. to 6 a.m. So one of our jobs was to go out. A lot of flights, a lot of sorties were flown out in the early morning. About 3 in the morning, we would go out and do what we call a pre-flight. So we'd climb up in the cockpit, hook the aircraft up to a power, climb up in the cockpit and turn on all the electronic equipment and run comm checks and navigation checks. And the planes had something called IFF, which is identification friend or foe. And it helps the ground and the planes identify each other as friendly or not. So we test that and all the instruments. So we made sure that all the electronics was in good working order. And then one of the things we did, since I was still out there until 6 a.m., was any flights that took off, on combat missions, we had to be out on the flight line or near the runway in case they had problems. So there were what we call save and abort. If a pilot was having a problem as he was firing up or taxiing out to the runway or wherever he was, if he had a comm or a nav or instrument problem, they'd radio us and we'd go out there and try to fix it with engines running. And sometimes they'd be at the end of the runway ready to take off and have a comm problem. And about all you can do is, pull black boxes. You swap out the equipment. You can't really repair anything. but we do that, quite often. We'd be out there on the end of the runway and have to pull a radio out, and our van was full of equipment, so we could replace anything we wanted. And so that was always kind of interesting.
So your shift began at what time and ended at what time?
Started at 6 p.m. and ended at 6 a.m. So I was pretty much out on the flight line all night.
Okay, so we both were basically, they used to call it the night shift, which was wonderful because you're not sweating like you were when you were working the day shift. We all started out on the day shift, at least I did, and then when you're going through T-shirts all day long, sweating and sweating.
Yep.
But when you get the night shift, it's wonderful is not really the word, but it's a little better than it was during the day shift, correct?
Yeah, you don't have the sun beating down on you. And there's one other great advantage to the night shift. You're up and awake during midnight chow. You want to talk about midnight chow for a minute?
Sure, go right ahead.
It was great. I mean, it was the middle of the night. So, all the mucky mucks, everybody above the rank of second lieutenant was sleeping, and most of the people that had more than 5 stripes were sleeping. So for midnight chow, the cooks and everything, it was not that thousands of people that would show up at lunchtime. And so Phuket had a reputation, in fact I was just reading about it on one of the websites, of having some of the best chow in Vietnam, and we really did. I mean, we had it great, and when you compare to the way we had it to a lot of the military, and my hat's off to the Army and the Marines and even Air Force, the police, the security police that were out on the lines, we got no complaints if you were stationed at Phuket and ate the chow. But midnight chow was especially great because of the lack of the number of people that went through. And so they'd ask you, how many eggs do you want and how do you want them? And you could take as much bacon as you wanted. And it was great. It was really, Thanksgiving, they went the extra mile. They went the extra 10 miles. And so, my hat is off to that group too, to the people that kept us fed. So
my Thanksgiving story in the chow hall, and I call it chow hall too, but I did read the other day that someone wrote in on one of the military sites and said, in Air Force, it was not the chow hall, it was the mess hall. So I call it the mess halls, but we call it the chow hall. Anyhow, I'm there. It was my first Thanksgiving at Phuket. Actually, it was my first Thanksgiving away from home. I'm standing in line to get to the turkey, and it's a long line. And I finally get to the front of the line just before you get to the cafeteria part, with the rails and everything. Mm-hmm. And this general walks in with a VIP part, and he says, "Say, Airman, you don't mind if we go in front of you, do you?" I said, "No, I'm going to be here a long time." So that was my Thanksgiving at Phuket.
There you go. That's great. You did make me, you reminded me of something that did happen to me, and that was at the Thanksgiving in '67, during the month of November, I think it was hepatitis broke out. And so for Thanksgiving, we got a little extra at the chow hall. You got your turkey and your stuffing, and the yams and the pie, and then at the end of the line you dropped your drawers and got a shot of gamma globulin.
We all remember that. That was like being shot in the rear end with a .45.
Yeah, and then riding back in the back of a truck or something, it felt like you were sitting on a golf ball.
I know. I remember that to this day. So the other question I have for you, while you were stationed at Phuket, was the base ever attacked while you were there?
Yeah, we were attacked, and I was always on the flight line, and that's what they were shooting at. They were primarily shooting at the aircraft. So I was out there. We were hit. I was actually pretty lucky. I was only hit while I was there a couple of times. I was there for the Tet Offensive. I believe it started in late January of '68. Yeah, I think January '68. end of January. And so that's when it primarily happened. You know, we had bunkers and, you know, that were sand filled, and we were just told to run for those, which we did. So luckily, while I was there, there had never been any infiltration. There were never any attacks that came on base. It was always rockets fired from the mountains. And Spooky, which was the C-47s, the smaller aircraft, Spooky had the 3 Gatling guns out the side. And as soon as Spooky took off, the incoming ended. They knew what that meant. You know, the Spooky, for those that don't know about it, it's 3 Gatling guns that each fired 6,000 rounds a minute, which is 100 rounds a second. And there are 3 of them out the side of the aircraft. So they could loiter in an area. They could circle an area and shoot at it. Unlike an aircraft that strafes, comes by, does its run, and then is gone. This aircraft could just linger up there for, you know, minutes. And
that used to be the nighttime show. We'd hear the ammunition going off, and then you would see the light look like a laser coming out of the sky. But there was tracer bullets. Every third bullet, I think, was tracer, and but it looked like a laser beam coming out of the sky, right?
Yeah, a red beam. Yep, and it didn't sound on the ground. It didn't really sound like a machine gun. It sounded like a motor running, you know, kind of a motor. And I had talked to an Army captain who had been out in an area where Spooky fired. And the captain said that you couldn't put your hand on the ground without touching at least one area where a bullet had hit.
It was just raining bullets.
Yeah, exactly. And that's why once Spooky had wheels up at night, you know, the incoming stopped. They got back in the tunnels.
My favorite sound, you got used to it, was the rocks shooting the howitzers, I guess, at nighttime
over the
base, right? And so you had this feeling that's you want to hear that sound because that's keeping the VC moving away from you.
Yep. Yeah, you're right. I don't know if the people out there, everybody listening, knows what rocks are, but it's ROK, Republic of Korea, and the South Korean government was kind of paying us back for our participation in the Korean War, and they sent South Korean soldiers there, referred to as rocks. And you're right, they fired their shells right over our bases. You could hear them go over. I haven't thought of that in a long time.
And of course, they would also test the engines late at night too. You could hear those from the flight line all the way across the base.
Yeah, oh yeah. I was awake. I was up, so it didn't matter because that was my shift. But yeah, you could hear all that racket going on.
Now, when you were at Phuket, did you go off the base at all, like down to Quy Nhon or something like that?
Yeah, we used to go to Quy Nhon, and that's a weird thing. You know, a few friends of mine, after I was there for a week or so, said, "Hey, we work 6 days a week, so we could go to Quy Nhon." And I said, "Well, how do we get there?" And for those that don't know, Phuket and Quy Nhon were about 25 miles apart. Quy Nhon was on the coast, and it's a big, huge city. Phuket, the town of Phuket was really just shacks. So if you went anywhere, you went into Quy Nhon. And so I asked my friends, I said, "Well, how do we get there?" And they said, "Well, we'll just go out to the back gate and hitchhike." Hitchhike in Vietnam, and we couldn't have weapons. We weren't allowed to have weapons. We weren't combat soldiers, you know. We weren't trained for that, so probably a good thing. Anyway, so we just go out there, and I've got pictures of the vehicles behind us and everything. But we just wait for a Jeep to come along, and if he was going part way, we'd hop on the Jeep and, you know, go until he turned off and then jump out. And then if an armored personnel carrier came by, we'd jump on that and go the rest of the way. And we could do that until Tet. We could do that through about the end of January. And once all that started, so for me, it was really only about 3 months that I could go to Quy Nhon. After that, we weren't allowed to go because of the danger.
Well, there was another danger at Quignon, which I did not participate in. They said if you come back from Quignon and you have something that we can't cure, you're not going back to the States.
Okay. Yep. Yeah.
Now
Like
I think that could be true. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't either.
That kept me away from extracurricular activity at that time. Speaking of extracurricular activity, did you go on R&R while you were there?
No, I didn't. To tell you the truth, I really didn't feel like I needed to go on R&R. I mean, I really loved my job. I know I was in danger and I wasn't in, the most pleasant part of the world, under those circumstances. But a lot of good friends, and my boss and I were very good friends. He became my mentor. And so I just didn't feel the need that I needed to. The other thing is I was planning on using the GI Bill to go to college when I got out. And I don't know if you remember, but we were able to save money. I was saving for college. So bottom line is the money that I would have used for R&R, I used to go to part of my college.
Yeah, I think you could put away 10% if you wanted to of your exorbitant paycheck that you got.
Yeah.
Do you remember when they paid you in funny money back in the day?
Military payment certificate.
Right, and then they said we're going to get sophisticated, and that you would have to come to your station there and salute the officer, and he would hand you the funny money. And they said we're going to get, and it was pretty fast. You had to sign your name, and they salute them and take your money. And if you remember, then they said, now we're going to get a little more sophisticated. You're going to have to go to the bank. Now you have everyone on the base standing in line. Remember that?
No, they didn't do that when I was there.
Oh yeah, that's progress.
I don't even remember a bank. I guess there was, but yeah. Interesting. I was going to say they had a really good savings program. Like you said, you could put 10% of your exorbitant pay in, and you got a real nice return. You got something like 10% per year on it. So it was a pretty good deal, and you couldn't spend your money there anyway. I mean, you couldn't spend a lot of it, and so, good deal.
Well, I was one of those airmen that I lost my money in poker games there. We used to go play at the Red Horse, and I came out broke, and I was so broke that I remember I was reading, when I was there, I kept a log/diary for the first 30 days. And I wrote in this diary log that I had to borrow 15 cents to buy a pack of cigarettes.
Yeah.
15 cents to borrow, Today you laugh about that. But
you didn't have 15 cents.
I didn't have 15 cents.
Prices. Yeah. Talk about prices for a pack of cigarettes, right? I remember that hard liquor, I don't remember the price of beer, but I remember hard liquor, which came in not quarts, but liters, which I think is a few more ounces than a quart, but basically a quart, was 95 cents a quart or a liter for everything. Anything all of the hard liquor was 95 cents a bottle.
Yeah, the alcohol was cheap. And they found ways of taking your money at Phuket. Remember they had slot machines there too.
Oh, I don't remember that.
Oh yeah, well wow. I was there, in 68, 69. You got there in 67, so maybe we had a little more gambling, and they were. Maybe this was in a war zone, folks. This is war as hell. They were building a swimming pool there while we were there.
I know. Yeah, the pool wasn't there when I was there. The baseball diamond was the tape center. For those people that don't know what the tape center was, you could check out. Back then we had reel-to-reel tapes. They were about 5-inch tapes normally. Right. Anyway, you could buy blank tapes, and you could check out a pre-recorded tapes, like of the Beatles, let's say one of their albums, and you could copy it. You could go to one of these stations that had two tape machines, and they were hooked together, put on headphones, and it was free, if I remember. You could just check out these, like I said, all the music of the time, that was popular, and make copies, because we could buy electronic equipment from Japan and have it sent home. So we could get stereo equipment. Everybody bought tuner amps, speakers, tape decks, the whole turntables. Back then it was records and tapes, and at a great price directly from Japan or Hong Kong. I think you get it from either. Do you remember that? Were you guys able to do that?
Oh, sure. I bought a reel-to-reel there. I bought a little Hitachi black and white television that I got to watch while I was there. I can't remember some of the other things I bought. The turntable with the built-in radio, and it was made, I forget the name of the company. I sent that all home in the whole baggage, and eventually, it's all gone now. But yeah, we had a lot of electronics to look at and buy.
I know. Yeah, it was a good deal. It was a real good deal.
Speaking of reel-to-reel and electronics and all of that, I didn't know Alan and I have something in common. We were both disc jockeys at the Phuket radio station, KCAT, and Alan was there in the beginning, and he's going to tell us how that all got started.
Okay, well, when I got there, as I said earlier, I got to Phuket around the 6th or 7th of 1967. There was a radio station in the back of, actually in the squadron that I worked out of, the 37th Armament and Electronics Squadron. And in the back area, the Armed Forces Radio Network had set up a little radio station. It was a little 2-room affair. There was a little booth that you sat in that was soundproofed, and then outside of that was a little office where a lot of the records and things were stored. And it was conveniently housed in the electronics, one of the electronics squadrons, which I worked out of. And they notified us that they were moving out. They were opening up a full-size station with English-speaking radio and a single-channel TV station showing American home movies, things like from home, from the U.S. And they would be leaving all the equipment at Phuket. They were going to get brand new equipment at the new facility in Quy Nhon. And if we wanted to continue running the station, we could, but there would be no financial assistance. We'd, be up to us to maintain everything. And being the electronics squadron, that wasn't a big problem because we had all the the tools and equipment to do that. So we took it over. And the problem is that the DJs were also taken away. They were actual professional DJs that were working at Phuket, and they moved with the operation to Quy Nhon. So we just volunteered, and my name was my full name is Alan David Sugarman, and I took the name Dave Allen as my radio name. What was your name again?
Saigon Steve.
Saigon Steve. 1420 on your radio dial.
At midnight.
Yeah, middle of the night.
Right.
Yeah.
Actually, we did. We had, you could take, people would call in and they would make requests, and you'd have these Army guys calling out in the boonies. Yeah, I'm out here. I hear you on the radio. Can you play this for me and my girlfriend back home? And on and on.
Yep. Yeah, they did. So we took over the radio station, and what was really nice was, since we didn't have any funding, one of the guys who was a DJ for us had a brother in Nashville, Tennessee, who was a professional DJ on the radio. So he wrote to his brother and said, if you've got any extra records or tapes or anything like that, we're on our own here. And so we were inundated. This radio station basically adopted us, and they asked us to record some of our shows on tapes that they sent us, and they'd play them on the radio in Nashville. And they sent us records and pre-recorded tapes, albums. They did, these little jingles that they used to have on the radio, where somebody would sing the jingle and they'd say, K-Cat Radio 1420. They recorded some of those for us and put that on tape so we could play those. So we became kind of somewhat of a pretty slick little operation for a backwoods bunch of guys. None of us had DJ experience, so we just winged it, and we had all listened to the radio, so you kind of knew what to do. There were no commercials or anything. It was all volunteer. And so it was a fun little, extracurricular activity to kill a couple of hours of your time while you're off duty.
Yes, I remember back at the radio station at Phuket, the control board was very primitive. Little switches to turn on the microphone and the the potentiometers to turn up for the records. Very, very primitive. It looks like it was built at Radio Shack, but it worked.
That was the new one. Well, when I got there, it was really bad, and so we, as I said, we had all the parts to repair everything. We had switches and relays and lights and all kinds of stuff. So we had all the stuff we needed to build a new one. And that new one that you were talking about was it was better than the first one. Let me put it that way. But it's GI ingenuity.
Right. How far did the signal go? Do you know? How far did we reach?
I don't really know, but we, not being bound by the Federal Communications Commission, but probably there are international laws. We never really knew about them. We beefed up the transmitter a bit above what it was. We never asked, it's easier to ask for forgiveness than it is permission. We never asked anybody if there was a maximum power we could put out. So we didn't go to 50,000 watts like they did in Clear Channel stations back in the U.S. But, we pumped out a little extra juice so we could get a little bit further.
Yeah, you weren't competing with the Mars station.
No, we were not.
You had that experience, right, where you had to go to the Mars station and wait 5 hours to get through to the States?
I never did. I just didn't want to. I didn't want to open that up. It was such a pain. Do people out there, have you talked to other people on your podcast about what the Mars station was?
Oh, there was one other chap that he talked about it, and I remember it well because the sergeant that ran it had the same name, so we were not related, but we had the same name, and I remember when we at the Mars station, and it's just like in the movies, you're talking to somebody at home, and it's all muffled, and you have to go over. And they talk, and they forget to say over because he has to change the switch from transmit to receive. And I made the mistake of saying, well, I'm here at, hi, Mom, I'm calling you from Phuket in Vietnam. And the guy gets on there, and he says, you can't say Phuket.
Yeah. We couldn't tell people where we were stationed. In fact, that Phuket was not on our address. It was not on there. But
it was a great deal because no postage, right? It was free.
Yeah, we wrote free at the top where the stamp would go. So that was one of the benefits. You're in a combat zone, you get free mail.
Well, speaking of the benefits, you have Costco out there in California, right? And so I was in the Costco one day, and I got some of this shrimp, the frozen shrimp, the kind that you get at cocktail parties where you dip it in the red sauce, right?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
And I was bored, and I turned the bag around. Well, I was reading the back of the bag, and it said, product of Vietnam. And I thought, that's why I was there, so I can sit here and eat shrimp from Costco.
Yep. Yeah, I know. Actually, I think they still are. It's been a couple of years, but I remember reading a couple of years ago that Vietnam which is a communist country, we have most favored nation trading status with them. Now, we have that with a lot of countries. It's not like, it's the only one, but they were a most favored, and you get clothing that's made in Vietnam and stuff. So an interesting situation where it's a country that we fought against and we're making nice with. So I guess we need more of that, actually.
Alan Sugarman out in California. Is there anything else you'd like to relate about your stay at Phuket Air Force Base in Vietnam?
The only thing I'd like to close with is my whole experience in the Air Force was great. It introduced me to the field that I'd stay in for the rest of my life, and started me out with a good livelihood. I was lucky to work with great people that were dedicated to the mission and to, in a lot of cases, your safety. And I have no regrets. And I have no regrets going to Vietnam. As I said, you make a lot of good friends, and I'm reconnecting with some right now as we speak. So it's great to look back on, and as I said, I have absolutely no regrets.
Alan Sugarman, thank you for your service. Well, that wraps up another episode of Phuket Stories. If you'd like to participate in a future Phuket Stories podcast, email your contact information to PhuketStories@gmail.com. That's PhuketStories@gmail.com. Until next time, thanks for listening to the Phuket Stories podcast. I'm Saigon Steve.